All right, let's jump right in. We're going back in time to 18th century Paris, and we're going to uncover a pretty wild story about how some of the most powerful ideas in history got their start, not in a stuffy university, not in a grand palace, but in a living room. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. Could a casual get together really change the world? Could conversations, maybe over some coffee and cake, actually lay the groundwork for new countries and totally new ways of thinking? Seems a little crazy, right?
Well, the answer is a huge, definite yes. This isn't some what if scenario. It actually happened. Right there in the middle of busy Paris, these living rooms basically became engines of change. The ideas that came out of them spread like ripples across the city and then, well, across the whole world.
So, what were these gatherings called? They were called salons. Picture this, a regular meeting held in a private home where all the brightest and most creative minds of the time would get together. And what did they do? They talked, they debated, and they dreamed up a whole new future. So, how did this whole thing work? You can literally think of the salons as the 18th century version of the internet. No, seriously, it was the original social network, a hub where people connected, and brand new, even radical information could be shared, argued about, and spread faster than ever before. Okay, so who were the people in the room? Who made these salons the hottest ticket in Paris? Let's pull back the curtain and look at the hosts and the guests. At the center of every single one of these amazing salons was a woman called a salonnière. And you gotta understand, these women were not just party planners. They were a combination of brilliant host, sharp moderator, talent scout, and even the financial backer, all rolled into one. They picked the guests, they guided the conversations, and they made sure everything stayed exciting, but also, civil. And think about this. In a time when women had very few rights, these salonnières wielded a ton of intellectual power. And that guest list, it was absolutely incredible. On any given night, you might walk in and see a famous philosopher like Voltaire arguing with a top scientist. Over in the corner, a famous artist might be talking about their new painting, while a noble chats with a traveler from another country. It was just this amazing melting pot of people. Now, to really get how big of a deal this was, just compare it to what school was like back then. Universities, super formal, super rigid, and for men only. And they had tons of strict rules. But salons, they were the exact opposite. Relaxed, open, and led by women. The whole point was the free exchange of ideas. It was a totally different universe of learning and thinking. And this really gets to the heart of what made salons so special. They just tore down social barriers. It didn't matter if you were some fancy duke or a writer who could barely pay his rent. If you had a great idea and could back it up with logic, you were in. Your brain was your VIP pass. All right, so what exactly were they all talking about? What were these huge, world-changing ideas that were bubbling up in these living rooms? Honestly, they talked about everything, and I mean everything. Nothing was off limits. They debate human rights, question traditions that were centuries old, and try to figure out the absolute best way to govern a country. Just small stuff like that. And yeah, those are the exact ideas that went on to inspire the American and French revolutions. Plus, they get into the latest science and what art and literature were all about. These were conversations that would literally change the map of the world. And science was a huge hit. It wasn't just boring, abstract talk. It was entertainment. The hosts would actually bring in scientists to do live demos of these mind-blowing new things like electricity and magnetism. It must have looked like magic. This was a huge deal because it brought science out of the dusty old lab and made it exciting for everyone. But look, all this chatter wasn't just for fun and games. It actually led to real, concrete results. And maybe the single biggest, most ambitious project to come out of the salons was the world's first modern encyclopedia. The salons were absolutely crucial for making this happen. I mean, the main editor, a guy named Denis Diderot, he used the salons to find all his expert writers. The ideas for the articles, they were hashed out and polished during these meetings. The funding to actually print the thing, the salonnières provided it. And get this, when the government banned the encyclopedia, it was the salon network that helped sneak the books out to the public. The encyclopedia flat out would not exist without the salons, period. Okay, but with all this passionate debate about revolutionary ideas, you have to have some ground rules, right? I mean, how did they stop these arguments from just turning into a giant, chaotic shouting match? Well, they basically had an unwritten rule book for conversation. You had to be witty, you had to be smart, but you could never, ever be rude or aggressive. You had to actually listen before you opened your mouth to speak. And you had to use clear language, no confusing jargon, so everyone could jump in, not just the experts. But the number one rule? The best idea wins. That's it. It's not about who has the loudest voice, it's about who has the best logic. And this whole set of rules wasn't about being stuffy or formal. It was all about creating a space where people felt safe enough to share really bold new ideas, a place where working together was more important than winning an argument. It was an environment designed to let brilliant ideas emerge. So, what was the long-term impact of all this? Let's trace the ripple effect and see how these conversations that started in a living room really did end up changing the entire world. Because these ideas definitely did not stay in Paris. What started as a conversation in a salon got written down in letters and journals. Those then traveled all across Europe. And from there, these incredible ideas about human rights and government crossed the Atlantic Ocean. And they landed right in the minds of the people leading the American Revolution. They were literally building a new country based on these salon-born principles. Now, of course, not everybody loved this. The people in power, the king and the church, they were seriously threatened by all this talk of freedom and individual rights. They tried to shut it all down. They censored books, they even threw some writers in prison. But the salon goers, they knew their ideas were important, and they believed they were worth the risk. And their legacy, it's pretty much everywhere you look today. The salons helped make free speech a bedrock principle of a good society. The ideas they spread directly sparked the American and French revolutions, which shaped the democracies a lot of us live in today. And by putting women in charge of the conversation, they took a huge step forward for gender equality. They're also the reason science and reason became so popular and central to how we think about education. When you boil it all down, the salons championed one truly revolutionary idea: that your worth isn't about your family name or how much money is in your pocket. It's about what you contribute with your mind. Your value comes from your ideas and from being part of that big ongoing conversation that we call society. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. The salons proved, without a doubt, that a great conversation can change the world. It just has to happen in the right place with the right people. So the question I have for you is, where are those conversations happening today? Where are our salons?